Am I on my wedding day? A woman in a gown as pure and white as my own swept into my bridal suite. Judging by the way she carried herself, this was a woman who had read every etiquette book ever written. She must have read the chapter that said you must never wear white to someone else's wedding. She'd done it intentionally. I had to admit that she was a stunning beauty. Raven black hair, high cheekbones, red lips the color of poison. But the moment she spoke, her words were nowhere near as pleasant as she looked. So, she said, giving me a sweeping, assessing look. You are the rogue girl. The term rogue girl hit like a slap. It was what pack members whispered behind my back when they thought I couldn't hear. The reminder of my unknown past and questionable status burned through me. However, it was true, I was a rogue when I met Derek, my alpha-fated mate. I didn't belong to this, or any pack. Yes, I'm Mia, I replied, forcing my lips into a pleasant smile. Derek's mate. The first look before the ceremony, the first time Derek would see me dressed as his bride, as the new Luna of the Silverclaw pack, was only minutes away. I was about to become Luna to one of the most powerful alphas in existence. I had to be composed, graceful, above petty insults, even though my wolf growled inside, urging me to show this woman exactly what a rogue girl was capable of. Before I had time to ask who this woman was, a voice came from the doorway. Cassandra. Caroline and Joe, the betas of Silverclaw, came rolling in behind her. Caroline stepped forward and pressed a kiss to the woman, Cassandra's, cheek. She grabbed both of Cassandra's hands and held them out so that she could see her whole outfit, fawning over her as if she were the bride. Stunning, as ever, Caroline gushed. Joe smirked, his gaze flicking to me as if daring me to react. Angelic, he said. Like the moon goddess herself. Cassandra soaked in the compliments and then her eyes landed on me, sharp and appraising. A slow smile curved her lips before she tilted her head in mock curiosity before turning back to Caroline. Care to introduce me? She said. Joe cleared his throat. Mia, this is Cassandra Laurent. She's the daughter of Alpha Laurent from the Eastern Ridge Pack. Cassandra is one of our oldest friends, Caroline explained, condescending. I knew Joe and Caroline never liked me. Was Cassandra just someone Joe and Caroline invited to make sure I didn't get to enjoy my big day? I reached up to touch the small scar on my eyebrow, a nervous tick, but I lowered my hand when I saw them both watching. I forced myself to relax. I had learned to control my emotions long ago, to present myself as worthy. I may not remember how I learned that lesson, but I would not stop doing that today of all days. I lifted my chin, smoothing my expression into something polite. Welcome, Cassandra, I said, my voice level. I'm glad you could join us. We're about to have the first look, Caroline said to the woman. Just through here. She pointed to the hall just outside the room where I waited. Derek will be here soon. Oh, Cassandra said. I didn't realize I'd stumbled into something so important. I was looking for the bathroom. I didn't mean to go rogue. On the word rogue, she threw me a look, her eyes sharp. There it was again, that word, like a blade slipping between my ribs. She let out a soft laugh and the betas chuckled along with her. Heat flushed through me. That label. The ever-present reminder of what I was to them. What I was to the pack. A stray. An outsider. The one they barely accepted, even after months of proving myself. I swallowed hard, willing myself to stay calm. Derek had chosen me, fated mate or not, and I had worked to earn my place. I wouldn't let her shake me. How lucky then, that you found us, I said sweetly. Her brow arched, as if surprised by my response. For a moment, the room was silent, tension thick between us. Then, as if bored with the conversation, Cassandra let out a sigh and turned away. Shall we go? She said, addressing Joe and Caroline. Without waiting for a response from me, they led the way to the small hall where Derek was waiting. I followed, keeping my shoulders back and my steps measured. Inside, my stomach twisted with unease. The ceremony space had been transformed for the occasion, every surface throughout the building draped in white and silver. There were flowers woven into every available space, candles flickering along the edges of the room. I had expected the room to be mostly empty, but for the photographer and my groom, the wedding ceremony itself was to be held in the great hall in the back of the building, but the Silverclaw pack had gathered here, their murmurs a low hum as they waited. No doubt they'd been invited by Derek, their alpha. Can you believe no one in the whole Moonstone Pack showed up today? I heard one of them mutter to the werewolf standing next to him. Unbelievable, his friend shook his head. Did they at least send a gift? The first man snorted. It had better be a nice one, he said. The pack can only be in mourning for so long. I don't care if they lost the Alpha's daughter. Not showing up today when all of the other packs are represented. An insult, his friend confirmed. Almost every pack was here, a testament to Derek's status. Only the Moonstone Pack was absent. Rumor had it they were still mourning their daughter, lost and very likely dead a year ago. While I think the tragedy deserved a bit more sympathy, their absence clearly did not sit well with our pack. After all, the Moonstone Pack had been enemies with Silverclaw for generations. I cleared my throat and they both looked at me in surprise, moving out of the way so that I could walk into the room. This was my moment, I thought, and took a deep breath. But all eyes were on Cassandra. She moved easily through the crowd, surrounded by people that looked at her with comfortable familiarity. They smiled, laughed, welcomed her as if she were the bride, as if she were the Luna. The ease with which they accepted her presence made me wonder if there was more to her. Then Derek walked in. Even through the haze of my frustration and unease, my breath caught. He was devastatingly handsome in his black suit, his dark hair with that silver streak above his right eye falling onto his forehead just so. I heard the click and whirl of the photographer snapping pictures. The stoic, stern look on Derek's face softened for a fraction of a second when he spotted me. His lips parted slightly, and something flickered in his gaze, hunger, recognition. Desire. I felt it, too. The pull. The bond. It had been there since that fateful day when we'd met. When he'd found me on the border of his pack's lands, a rogue werewolf with no memory. A warmth spread through my chest, a reminder of the connection between us. My mate. Chosen by the moon goddess herself. But then Cassandra stepped forward. Derek's expression changed, his posture stiffening as he registered her presence. His gaze swept over her gown, something unreadable crossing his face. Surprise. Maybe uncertainty. And something else, something softer. I clenched my hands around the bouquet of flowers held tightly in my grip. Derek, Cassandra purred, stepping toward him, friendly and familiar. It's been a long time. Derek turned to his friend and spoke to her, words even my superior were hearing couldn't make out. From my elbow came a voice. Joe's. I always thought this would be their wedding, he said. I turned to look at him and his gaze was resting on Derek and Cassandra. They vowed, a long time ago, to only mark each other. I stiffened. Marking, a sacred act between mates, binding them together. Forever. I looked back at Derek. His eyes were still on Cassandra. I had thought Cassandra was just another woman who resented my presence like all the rest of them. But now, watching the way people looked at her, the way Derek spoke to her, intimate and soft, I realized I had been wrong. Though the moon goddess had chosen me to be his mate, Derek had, long ago it seemed, chosen her. And now, she was here, standing boldly at our wedding, like a storm I never saw coming. Am I? Cassandra reached out and put a hand on Derek's arm. The wolf inside me, Knox, snarled. But I quieted her and stilled with resolute conviction. I took a step forward, steeling my spine, standing up straight, wrapping myself in an illusion of courage and dignity. The wolves of Derek's pack didn't yet fully see me as their Luna, and I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of showing how unsure I suddenly felt, how threatened. Joe stepped up next to me, his eyes narrowing as if I were his prey. They've been together since they were kids, Mia, he said. He wasn't trying to be subtle or quiet. Everyone in the room could hear him. If it weren't for Derek's father passing away, if Derek hadn't had to stay here and take over as Alpha. Joe, Derek warned, his voice sharp as a blade. But Joe just kept talking, every word out of his mouth a needle that seemed to pierce my skin. They were supposed to go on a trip, he went on. Derek and Cassandra. Around the world. They'd been planning it for years. Caroline slid in to back up her mate. It's true, she said, linking her arm through Joe's. We all knew what it was. An engagement trip. Derek looked thunderous, but a smile slid up Cassandra's cheeks, snake-like. If Derek hadn't had to stay here and deal with everything that happened, he would have gone on that trip and they never would have been separated, Joe continued. It was a temporary split-up. This wedding day would have been theirs. Derek growled, the sound low and menacing. I noticed Cassandra took a step away from him. If we hadn't lost his father, our alpha, he spat, a rogue, never would have stood a chance. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. My fingers tightened around my bouquet, petals crumpling under my grip. I had heard pack members mentioning Cassandra before. But this was something he had never told me. I glanced at Derek, searching for any sign of denial. His jaw was tight, but he said nothing. Derek's mother stepped forward. Silverclaw's once great Luna, and the woman who had taken me under her wing and schooled me in the ways of leading a pack the last few months, who had been so impressed with how quickly I picked everything up, did her best to break the tension. Mia and Derek are about to be married, she reminded the gathered pack, her voice warm but firm. Let's give them some privacy. I turned to give her a grateful look, but she was already leading the way, shuffling the gathered masses out of the hall. I turned to Derek instead. The moments stretched between us, unspoken words hovering in the air. Cassandra lingered, her eyes locked onto Derek's face before she finally turned and swept from the room, taking the remnants of my confidence with her. When we were alone, I forced myself to meet Derek's gaze. Why didn't you tell me? My voice came out steadier than I felt. Derek exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his face before answering. Because it doesn't matter. I chose you. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to let this moment pass and allow myself to be swept back up in the excitement of our wedding. Inside me, my wolf called to his. I stepped closer, pressing a soft kiss against his lips. For a second, he hesitated, just long enough for doubt to creep in, but then he responded, his hands gripping my waist, his kiss deepening. The mate bond flared between us, igniting a warmth in my chest. It was enough. It had to be enough. But Cassandra's words, and Joe's, echoed in the back of my mind. Back in the dressing room, I barely had time to catch my breath before I saw her. Cassandra. Waiting for me. Cassandra, I said, more steadily than I felt. I didn't want her to know how much her presence rattled me. I reached into the pocket I'd had sewn into my wedding dress and fingered the hidden medallion I carried there, my fingers running along its smooth planes and hard edges. It had been my talisman since my days wandering the borderlands as a rogue. You don't deserve Derek. She wasted no time before she spoke, her voice like silk wrapped around a dagger. Now that I'm back, there won't be any place for you. I'm sure you've hoarded the wealth of Silverclaw since Derek took you in. Any rogue would. She flipped her dark locks over her shoulder and gave me a look as though I were something stuck to the bottom of her expensive heels. Take the money and leave. I blinked, taken aback. It had never occurred to me to steal from Derek and the Silverclaw pack. Rogue or not. A slow anger uncurled inside me, replacing the unease her words had brought on. I lifted my chin. We're fated mates, I reminded her. She swallowed thickly, and I could feel Knox inside me, smiling wolfishly, encouraging me on. He's never once mentioned you. I held up the bouquet of flowers in my hands. Need I remind you that this is our wedding day? Cassandra shifted uncomfortably on her feet. You're a guest, Cassandra, I said, my spine straightening. It's just good manners to invite the ex. Cassandra laughed, low and mocking, though I could sense the growing doubt inside her. Could see a manic fury cross her features. Is that so? She took a step closer, the scent of expensive perfume cloying in the small space. Then tell me this, if he had to choose between the two of us, who do you think he'd pick? I opened my mouth to respond, but Cassandra moved, quick as a viper. She grabbed a pair of scissors from the vanity, left there from the final wedding gown alterations earlier in the day. I thought for sure she was about to attack me. Knox's rage swept over me and I growled, low in my throat. It wasn't the angry, lost growl of a rogue. It was the fighting snarl of a Luna. I felt it wash over me in a bloom of strength. Cassandra faltered, but her grip around the scissors tightened, her knuckles going white. Leave, she said, all pretense of arrogance gone from her voice. He's mine. The moon goddess says otherwise, I said, stepping forward. He's always been mine. Her voice trembled with unhinged feeling. He always will be. Put the scissors down, Cassandra. My voice was level and commanding. If I can't have him, I'll. You'll what? I asked calmly. Hurt me? How do you think he'll react when he finds out you threatened me? When he finds out you hurt me? She stood for a moment, unsure. And then a slow smile crept up her cheeks. She moved to the door that led into the hall where our ceremony would be held. I could hear the assembled masses mumbling behind it, no doubt gossiping about all that had transpired already. In her hands, she raised the scissors and slashed them down at herself, slicing through the fabric of her own dress, the delicate white material tearing open. Then, she tossed the scissors back towards me, and with a practiced gasp, she stumbled out the door of the dressing room and into the great hall. I rushed after her. What I started to say, but that's when she let out a piercing, desperate scream. All the eyes in the room whipped toward the two of us, shocked gasps echoing off the elegantly decorated walls. By the time I realized what she had done and why she had done it, it was already too late. The moment Derek and Joe entered the hall, Cassandra staggered forward with a whimper, clutching at the torn fabric of her dress. She pushed me, she gasped, her voice a perfect mixture of vulnerability and quiet accusation. She ripped my dress. The room fell into stunned silence before erupting into hushed murmurs. Every eye turned to me, some filled with judgment, others with barely concealed disdain. My heart pounded. That's not what happened, I started, my voice steady despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. In the corner of the room, Derek's mother shifted on her feet, her gaze sweeping between Cassandra and myself, the look on her face one of puzzled suspicion. For a moment, I thought she might step forward to defend me, but Derek moved first. The warmth we had shared turned suddenly cold. His gaze was dark, body taut with barely restrained fury. He strode forward without hesitation, his presence filling the room. Before I could react, he shoved me aside. He wasn't trying to hurt me, but he was sending me a message, he was choosing her. He whipped off his jacket and settled it gently across Cassandra's shoulders. I was frozen to the spot, unable to make sense of what had just happened. She'd threatened me, and when I refused to submit, she immediately played the victim. It was an acting job worthy of an Academy Award. I would have been impressed, but she'd just seemingly altered the course of my life. This is the problem with rogues, Derek said, almost to himself. His voice was like ice. No self-control. I thought I was doing a pretty admirable job controlling myself, all things considered. But that's when Cassandra whimpered, curing into herself as though she were made of porcelain. It hurts, she murmured, her voice trembling. She was clutching her arm. Derek's entire demeanor shifted in an instant. The rage in his eyes shifted into something like panic. He reached forward and pulled the lapels of his jacket more tightly around Cassandra, shielding her from view as though my presence alone was what was causing her pain. We should get her to the Pack doctor, Joe murmured to his alpha, shooting me a look. Derek nodded and swung Cassandra up and into his arms as though she weighed nothing at all. I clenched my fists, stepping in front of him. What about our guests? I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Are you really going to sweep out of here with another woman in your arms on our wedding day? He hesitated. The flicker of uncertainty in his expression lasted a heartbeat. Then Cassandra let out another soft whimper, and it was gone. He pulled her closer to himself, tenderly. Her arm has been hurt before, he said, by way of explanation. We can't wait. I'm sorry if this causes you embarrassment, Mia, but this is direct consequence of your actions. Without another glance at me, he turned and strode out of the hall, carrying her away. The whispers around me turned into outright murmurs. A woman nearby put her hand to her chest and sighed dreamily, watching their retreating forms. They're still so in love, she said, her voice a mix of sadness and wistful longing. My face burned with humiliation, but I lifted my chin. If I showed weakness, if I let them see how deep a wound had just been cut, they would smell the blood. They would never stop carving into me. I turned toward Derek's mother, my last hope for support, but she only looked at me with something that wasn't quite pity. But it wasn't approval, either. It was like she was watching a tragedy unfold, powerless to stop it. She said nothing. And that silence, more than anything, hurt the most. Derek had asked me to stay behind at the ceremony venue to attend to the guests, but something inside me, maybe it was Knox, told me to follow them. I had to know what Derek was really thinking. He had already proved that he wasn't willing to be straightforward with me. That he wasn't willing to tell me the truth. And so I followed them, hovering just outside the waiting room, eavesdropping and watching them like some kind of ridiculous international spy. The pack doctor's office smelled of antiseptic and herbs, the sterile scent clashing with the warm breeze outside. I stood, silent and still, watching Cassandra nestled into Derek's embrace, her delicate fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt. She looked like she belonged there in his arms. Nearby, Joe and Caroline milled about impotently, waiting to leap to the command of their alpha. Joe had undone his bow tie, which hung limply from his collar. Then the exam room door opened and the doctor stepped through, looking at Derek expectantly. "Sir," he said. Derek rose, reaching up to gently remove Cassandra's fingers from his shirt. He smiled down at her gently. "I'll be right back," he said, and walked over to where the doctor was waiting, the two of them discussing something in quiet tones. Joe and Caroline didn't hesitate, moving to Cassandra's side. Caroline knelt beside her, taking her hands gently in her own. "I don't want you to worry," Caroline said. Cassandra pouted slightly. "What about Mia?" I stood rooted to the spot I was standing, more alone than I had been the day Derek found me. "You know there's no comparison," Caroline told the other woman. In Derek's heart, she went on to explain. "There's only you." Her voice was laced with sympathy, but not for me. Derek had finished speaking with the doctor and came back over to Cassandra, lowering himself into the chair on her other side. "Right, Derek?" Caroline said, her tone pleading. Derek sighed, but he didn't deny it. "Don't overthink it," he told Cassandra. My hands began to tremble. I curled them into fists, nails biting into my palms to keep the emotion at bay. Cassandra sat upright. I noticed that she pushed herself up with the arm that was supposedly injured. "You're still going to go through with it," she said, her voice laced with a disbelieving bitterness. "You're still going to marry Mia." Derek sighed, rubbing his temples. "She's my fated mate," he said, resigned. "I can't just abandon her. It's my responsibility." The word stung, though I know I should have felt relief. He hadn't said I want to marry her. He hadn't said she's the woman I choose. I was his responsibility. A duty to be carried out. A burden. Cassandra's lashes lowered demurely, her lips pursing as if she were thinking something through. Then, in a voice so soft it almost didn't reach me, she said, "You'd really trust a rogue's child to be the future alpha of your pack?" I inhaled sharply, hoping they didn't hear me. Derek stiffened beside her. Just the mention of possible children, and I could feel heat radiating through the fated bond between us. Just for a moment. We weren't yet marked, but the connection was still there. The feeling drowned out that hated word rogue. And left me with perhaps a whisper of hope. Cassandra's next words quickly dashed it. "We could have our own children," she continued, her voice a delicate whisper, wholly unaware of the pulse of feeling that had just raced between Derek and I. She leaned in closer toward him, her fingers brushing against his chest. "Laying the perfect trap. You could still see her whenever you want." Her meaning was clear. I carefully watched the chiseled features of Derek's face, his nostrils flaring with a surge of something that was hard to name. Maybe anger. Maybe desire. Desire for who, I couldn't tell. He turned to Cassandra, angling his body towards her. "She could live nearby, maybe," she went on, reaching up to run her fingers along the skin of his jaw. I could hear the rasp of his 5 o'clock shadow. "But you and I could." I watched from the doorway, my heart thudding in my ears. From this angle, Cassandra's face was tilted toward Derek's, their proximity intimate. Anyone looking in would think they were about to kiss. Maybe they already had. Maybe I had been a fool this entire time, trying to play the part of a Luna when I was nothing more than an unwanted rogue. The doctor came to the waiting area and beckoned them all into the exam room. I watched them go, my head swimming. I remembered those first days after Derek found me. The pull we both felt, the magic of the moon goddess, fated mates. We'd spent nights together, our inner wolves howling for each other, full of passion and heat. I had fallen in love with him, then. Fallen in love with the life I thought we'd lead together. Derek as Alpha. Me as his Luna. I'd been a girl with no real memory, only knowledge of the few months I'd spent living with a pack of rogue she-wolves before he found me. I had thought, during those heady nights, with him docked in the cradle of my hips, that if I worked hard enough, I could elevate my status, I could become his equal. I had fought for this. I had endured every humiliation, every dismissive glance, every cruel word, all for what I thought was love. I endured it all to prove I belonged at his side. All those nights together, all that work, and when it came down to it, I was nothing more to Derek than an obligation. A duty. A mistake. What a fool I had been, I thought, wiping at tears that stung my eyes and streamed down my face. I took a deep breath and shoved open the exam room door without knocking. They all turned to look at me in surprise, Cassandra, Joe, Caroline. The doctor. I had only eyes for Derek. He looked at me in shock and his mouth opened as if to say something, but no words came. Can I speak with you, please? I said, my voice measured. I might look a frightful mess, but I was determined to sound like the calm and commanding Luna I had one day hoped to be. Derek followed me out into the waiting room and with one look from her Alpha, the receptionist fled, leaving us alone in the room. Mia, he started, but I interrupted him. How long? I demanded. He seemed momentarily surprised by my mettle. How long have you known you were never going to treat me as your equal? That I was going to be your Luna in name only. His expression became unreadable. Since the beginning. The words hit like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs. Then why? Why pretend? Why make me believe there was a future here? I never lied to you, Mia, he said simply. You were the one who assumed things would be different. So I'm just a warm body, then, I said, my tone suddenly flat. Someone to keep your bed warm. This is what our relationship is, he said, turning to the window with his hands behind his back, like some CEO addressing an underling with placating indifference. I won't cheat. But taking responsibility for you is the biggest kindness I can offer. He turned back to me. You're a rogue, Mia. Our society would never let me treat you as an equal. I took a step closer to him, hands trembling. And our children? Will you look down on them the way you look down on me? Silence. Derek said nothing, but his lack of response spoke louder than any words could. My heart crumbled. Whatever foolish hope I had left turned to ash in my chest. Reject me, I whispered, my voice raw. His brows furrowed slightly. What? Reject me, I said louder, my body shaking with the force of my emotions. If I'm nothing to you, then end this. End our bond. Inside me, I could hear Knox hell no. Derek exhaled sharply, as if his wolf Erebus were howling at him, too. My wolf needs yours, he said, with uncharacteristic vulnerability. But what I need, I said, my voice almost a whisper, is more than what you're willing to give me. I saw a mix of emotions cross his face, and then he steeled it with a cold resolve. You have nowhere else to go, Mia. Running away won't change anything. I thought of Cassandra on the other side of the door. Of Joe and Caroline and the whispers that followed me even in the pack house. Anything is better than this. I met his gaze, my chin lifting. By the laws of the moon and the bond that ties us, I, Mia, reject you, Alpha Derek of the Silvermoon Pack as my fated mate. I sever the sacred bond the moon goddess has woven between us. From this moment forward, you are no longer mine. Knox gnashed her teeth and howled, but I would not be swayed. Derek's eyes darkened, the muscles in his jaw tightening. Shock flickered across his face for the first time, but it was gone just as quickly. He remained silent, standing utterly still as if he hadn't just heard me sever the one thing that tied us together. Pain sliced through me like claws raking through my soul, the rejection tearing at something deep inside. I gasped, barely keeping my footing, but I refused to let him see me break. I turned on my heel. Mia. His voice was sharp, an order disguised as concern. You're emotional right now. I'll give you some time. But if you don't come back before the wedding, don't bother coming back at all. I didn't hesitate. I pushed open the door and stepped into the corridor, leaving behind the only real life I had ever known. Cassandra. I walked out of the exam room behind Joe and Caroline, careful to make sure I was still cradling my arm. The doctor had said that the x-rays were clear, but that didn't mean I couldn't still make them all think it hurt. Derek stood near the window of the exam room, shoulders tense, staring at nothing. We all stood watching him for a moment, taking in the rigid line of his jaw, the way his hands clenched at his sides. What happened? Joe said, stepping forward. Derek finally turned to his beta. She's gone, he said. Who's gone? Caroline said, her brow creased in concern. Mia. Derek's face was barely controlled. Did she go back to the venue? Asked Caroline. No, growled Derek. I was determined to be a Luna, but I was afraid when he was like this. But she'll return before the wedding. I've warned her. And she has nowhere else to go. Let her go, Derek. She wasn't right for you. She never was, I said, pressing my lips together, feigning sympathy. I steeled my nerves, crossed the room and placed a hand on his arm, allowing my touch to linger. You know it's true. She was never meant to be our Luna, Caroline added. A rogue could never handle that. Would you like me to call your mother? I carefully asked. Have her tell the guests that the wedding is off? No. He answered, more quickly and forcefully than I would have liked. I told you. She'll be back. But if she doesn't? You're not going to go after her, are you? Asked Caroline, flitting her eyes ever so briefly to mine. Derek's silence was answer enough. Let me handle Plan B then, I murmured. You have enough to worry about without chasing after a girl who doesn't belong. He said nothing. He didn't have to. I had already won. Joe and Caroline stepped up to their alpha, eager to do whatever they could for him. I drifted back, already forming the next steps in my mind. Mia would not return. That much, I would make certain of. I slipped out the door and pulled out my phone. It rang 3 times before being picked up. Make arrangements, I said quietly. She's not to step foot on this territory again. There was a silent hesitation, the phone hissing in my hands. Understood, the voice finally said. I hung up and smiled to myself. Mia had never been worthy of Derek. And now, she never would be. Derek. I stood at the head of the aisle, staring down the path where at this moment Mia should have been walking towards me, a vision in white. My bride. The moment her rejection hit me, pain had flared through my chest like a silver blade sinking deep into my heart. It was sharper, more unbearable than I had ever imagined. My wolf howled in agony, a sound so raw that I had to grit my teeth to keep it from slipping out into the room. Not since my father died had I felt such a depth of grief and wretchedness. I had ordered Joe and Caroline to take me back to the venue, refusing to let my emotions show. Refusing to acknowledge them. Instead, I buried the pain, the way I always had. I looked out over the heads of all the gathered guests and sighed angrily. She had no right. She had no right to make me feel this way, not when I had spent months pushing her away. During the day, at least. At night, when my wolf called to hers. Memories of Mia flooded my mind. Memories of those hot, passionate nights, yes, but also, I shook my head to clear it, but the memories came on stronger than ever. Mia, earnestly going over the books, familiarizing herself with the intricate workings and business dealings of the pack. Mia, quickly memorizing the names of all the wolves who lived in the pack house, knowing their jobs, their ranks, even their family members. Mia, standing next to my mother as she tutored her, her back straight and strong. I remembered the way she had looked at me, always hopeful, even when I was cold to her. The way she had tried, despite everything, to be my mate. I had cursed the moon goddess at first, sending my fated mate to me in the form of rogue she-wolf. But earlier today, when I saw her standing there in that dress, something in me had shifted. For the first time, I had imagined a future where I stopped resisting. A future where I let her in. A future where maybe, just maybe, I could accept her. Fully. A rogue. A Luna. Mine. But she didn't give me the chance. She walked away first. I broke my rules and gave her a chance to come back even after she rejected me. But the night was growing darker, and there was still no sign of her return. Fury burned through me, overpowering all other emotion. I clenched my fists, my nails biting into my palms. Find her, I ordered, my voice sharp, leaving no room for argument. My men rushed out, scattering into the fading dusk, but I barely heard them. The weight of the rejection still lingered, a wound I didn't know how to heal. As time dragged on with no news, guests began to murmur, their whispers filling the silence like an unwanted chorus. Some of the more important guests began leaving, their expressions a mix of disapproval and pity. This was a disgrace, an alpha whose mate had rejected him on his wedding day. I forced myself to stand tall, the humiliation that was clawing in my gut souring into anger. With gritted teeth, I called Joe over and announced what I never thought I would have to say: cancel the wedding. The words left a bitter taste in my mouth. Then, my phone buzzed. Alpha, one of my men said, his voice urgent. There's been a sighting. Someone saw a woman who looks like Mia. But, he hesitated. There was some trouble. My heart slammed against my ribs. What do you mean? An accident, Alpha. A bad one. My head started ringing, and deep inside, I could feel Erebus give a mournful howl. Where is she now? I asked, my voice tight. She was taken, sir, he said regretfully. There was some confusion at the scene, but the witness said she was taken away by the attacker. My heart pounded in my chest as I hurried down the busy sidewalk. The people walking by me were giving me odd looks. Who could blame them? I was a runaway bride rushing down the street like a crazy person. I pulled up short and turned, catching my reflection in a store window. Next to a mannequin dressed in jeans and a cute green top, I could see myself, an ill-defined rogue with nowhere to go. I was nothing but what all those people at the wedding venue saw in me. The warmth of the day was cooling as it turned to dusk. Chilled, I wished I had thought to get myself something warmer. I had ducked into the store, buying the outfit that had been on the mannequin. I just needed something that didn't scream runaway bride. I'd left my wedding dress and bouquet on the floor of the dressing room, taking only my medallion. I palmed it now, willing my hands not to tremble. I couldn't second-guess myself. I had done the right thing. Right? I had spent too long waiting for Derek to accept me, hoping that one day he'd look at me the way I had always looked at him. But I couldn't live like that anymore. I had to choose myself, even if it meant losing everything. But now, as I wandered unfamiliar streets with no plan and nowhere to go, doubt crept in. I wrapped my arms around myself, forcing a deep breath. I had survived worse. I had spent the only months of my life that I could remember living as a rogue. I could do it again. I thought back to that first terrifying day, waking up under a lonesome pine with 3 rogue she-wolves sitting nearby. They had told me that I'd survived an attack by another band of rogues, that I'd been thrown off a cliff, and that my wolf had helped me heal. But I had no memory of the attack. Or of anything about my life before then. All I'd had were the clothes on my back and the medallion around my neck. I trusted those rogues from then on. Any others would have slit my throat and taken it from me. But they hadn't taken, those 3. They'd given with a generosity I didn't always feel I deserved. They'd given me hope, they'd given me friendship. They'd given me my name. Mia. I lived with them for 3 months, a happy, if careworn and thin, 3 months, scavenging what we could afford and stealing what we couldn't. And that's when Derek found me, on the borderlands of his pack territory while out on patrol. He was about to tear Maggie apart when he scented me. And I him. Goddess, despite all the holes in my memory, I'll never forget that moment. One inhale and it was like the earth shifted beneath me. A rich, intoxicating blend of cedarwood and crisp autumn air, tinged with something uniquely him, something that called to the deepest part of my soul. The moment our eyes met, a surge of recognition crashed into me, primal and absolute. Knox stirred at once, whispering the one truth I couldn't ignore. Mate. The word had echoed in my bones, undeniable. Derek's expression had been rigid, and I remember scanning every bit of him, trying to take it all in. His wide, muscular shoulders. Dark hair with that swoop of silver above his right eye. His broad jaw clenched as if fighting against the same pull that had set my heart racing. In that instant, I knew, I belonged to him, and he belonged to me. Derek. Tears stung at my eyes. Why did I have to think of him again? Why? I turned and made my way down a quieter street, walking fast in hopes of escaping my thoughts. But just as I was following the curve of the sidewalk, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something was wrong. A low rumble reached my ears. An engine. I turned to look. A black car was coming, fast. Panic surged through me, and I spun on my heel, ready to run. But before I could move, the car swerved. Headlights blinded me. I barely had time to throw myself backward before the door flew open and figures leapt out. I gasped, stumbling as hands reached for me. No! I screamed, thrashing wildly, but there were too many. Strong arms grabbed me, pinning mine to my sides. A cloth pressed against my mouth, and the world tidaled. Using my last ounce of strength before my limbs went weak, I shoved blindly, hurling myself backwards. The screech of tires and then pain. Blinding pain. A distant voice shouted. Not the ones trying to take me, someone else. Footsteps, Car doors slamming and then the peel of tires on asphalt. Before darkness swallowed me whole, I looked up, and framed against matte black sky, I glimpsed a face I had only ever seen on TV. The Alpha of the Moonstone Pack. And then, just before everything faded, voices called out to me, desperate. Urgent. Elena, Elena. And then, nothing.